So I'm a huge fan of the power metal band Warlord, Bill Thomas and Mark Zonder. And they've had different lineups. They've had different eras. But I'm a huge fan, monster fan of Warlord. And through High Roller Records, High Roller did these really beautiful deluxe editions of the first, specifically 4 studio albums, which comprise of Deliver Us and The Cannon's Obstructions Have Begun, Rising Out of the Ashes, and The Holy Empire. These were all done while William Thomas was still alive. And in those books, there are interviews with William Thomas by Chris Papadakis. And so I'm going to read those interviews. So there you go. So we're going to get into it now. If you're a fan of Warlord, if you don't have these special editions, or if you just want to sit back and relax, I'll try to do my best not to bore you too much, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to get past all the preamble and everything that leads up to the interviews, and we're going to start with the first question, the first interview, and let's hit it. Demo 1981, the first Warlord demo. The Warlord first demo tape. Yes, back on 1981, a demo tape was the first usual step of a band. For Warlord, this demo was something more. It was the first result of all those hours of rehearsing and their actual first recording under an almost stable lineup. The band's lineup of those demos recordings were William Thomas on guitar and bass, Mark Zonder on drums, Jack Rucker on vocals, and Jerry Alcavar on keyboards. Under this lineup, they would enter the studio, which was mainly used by punk rock bands of the era, and they would start to record their very first demo tape. Those demo recordings present 5 phenomenal Warlord compositions in their very first form. Opener Winds of Thor would become a trademark Warlord song. It is known as an official recording from the Lordian Guard debut, as Thomas represented this composition for his project, and of course from the Rising Out of the Ashes album. But this historical version found on the 1981 demo is the very first one. It is actually this very track that would make Brian Slagle from Metal Blade Records offer the band a slot on his Metal Massacre compilation series. It is a fabulous mid-tempo epic composition that really shines even in this very primitive form. The next track is Black Mask, is one of the darkest songs that Warlord have composed in this early version of this demo. You can hear Jack Rucker's vocals approaching, which is a little different in many parts compared to the official version of the tune, and Jerry Alcavar's primitive keyboard themes offering the song an even more spooky touch. Child of the Dam is one of the most powerful Warlord songs. In this version, you can hear the keyboard parts filling the song. You can hear Rucker delivering some raw vocals while Zonder is thundering the drum kit, and Thomas is delivering one of his very first super fast guitar solos. Soliloquy is also presented in this demo for the very first time. The song is well known by its official version included on And the Cannons of Destructions Have Begun video soundtrack, featuring Rick Cunningham on vocals. However, this demo version is done with Jack Rucker behind the microphone. Rucker's vocals approaching perfectly captures the song's dramatic feeling, making this version a very interesting one. The Rainbow is the only song on this demo that hasn't yet been re-released and represented under an official version. Carrying a melancholic while epic vibe, this is for sure a very special composition. Thomas would state on Letter Point of Time that the song's main melodic part was inspired by Scorpion's 70s era. Without a doubt, the song is a real hidden diamond. City Walls of Troy. The term dark, epic power metal that is often used by the band to describe their music could have been generated by this song. Dark, epic, and heavy, City Walls of Troy has become another trademark song through the years, especially for the Greek fans, thanks to its lyrical topic. Many people got in touch with this song through its official version from the Holy Empire album. Well, here it is in its initial version, an almost doom metal main riff, a passionate Jack Rucker, some more blazing guitars by Thomas, and the myth of Troy lives again. Next chapter is The Beginning. 1981. Warlord recorded their very first demo tape. Bill Thomas has some interesting things to remember from this period. Joe Hall, who was filling the bass slot for the period of time before the demo recordings, left. Did you audition another bassist? Bill, yes. One was Rick Fox. Rick was initially a club friend of mine, and he happened to play Bass. It was after Joe Hall had left and we had auditioned many bass players. Wick was very popular around Hollywood and he was very excited to be part of Warlord. He was dying to get into Warlord. He became so excited that he even changed the logo and made stickers and put them up all over some clubs at like the Troubadour. But when it came to the hard work of playing the bass, he could only play the simplest bass line, so it became evident that he could not play with us. We gave him a chance because he was a friend, but only for a few months. His time with us was a trial period, and he was just cut out for simpler music. I think it was then that we started auditioning again, finally bringing in Paul Carmen. Anyway, even after it didn't work out with Rick, we remained friends. I think that's when he got involved with the band Sin. He invited me to go see them, and they were perfect for him. Very simple music. Question. You mentioned Paul Carmen. Do you mean Paul Carmen of Leatherwolf? Bill. Yes. After Rick, we started auditioning again. We discovered Paul Carmen, a very nice guy, humble, and a great bass player. During Paul's time, which was only for a few months, again a trial period, Dave Watery had slowly been evolving into an excellent bassist, taking bass lessons at the Bass Institute of Technology, and he was from our hometown, San Jose. Plus, he lived with us, and I helped him learn more about music theory. He just got better and better until he was good enough to play with us. In fact, we were just waiting for him to reach that point. We knew he would because he was determined and he loved Warlord. Question. Okay, let's focus on the recording lineup. Who is playing keyboards on the demo and how did you find him? Jerry Alcaver is playing keyboards. He was an interesting guy in a bad way. Mark and I wanted a keyboard player, and keyboard players were hard to find. We put up an ad, and Jerry called us. It turned out that his brother was the keyboardist for Montrose, and we were big fans of Montrose. As you know, Mark even later played with Montrose for some gigs. Anyway, Jerry was the first guy that we added to the band who actually officially recorded with us. Jerry's father, by the way, was pretty well known in Hollywood film scoring business. Note, William actually pointed out that his father was a fat cat in Hollywood film score business. Anyway. Jerry played on the first demo, and that's it. We got rid of him because he was so weird. I mean, he was demented. Question. The vocal slot eventually filled by Jack Rucker, Damian King 1. How did you meet him, and did you audition other singers before you secured Jack as the singer of Warlord? Bill. Yes, there were many singers who auditioned for us before Jack. Many singers. But none of them played with the band because they couldn't sing our songs. Jack answered an ad and then came over to Mark's apartment. We listened to his album. And we didn't like the album except for one song called The Tower. And we determined just from that one song that he would be a perfect singer for Warlord. Funnily, after hearing Black Mass, Jack was concerned that we might be a satanic band. Not that Jack was religious or anything, but I do remember, though Jack would not sing the lyrics on Child of the Damned, where there is the quote from John Milton, "Is it better to rule in hell than it is to serve in heaven?" So I changed it for Jack to a question. Is it better to rule in hell than it is to serve in heaven? Either way, it worked, so we were happy. But Jack had these little concerns, and he wasn't even religious. Anyway, there were a lot of leavings and returns of Jack in the band. You know, he had the demo tape for a while before we found out about Slagle and Metal Massacre. Mark and I listened to it over and over again, and just like any new band hearing their recording for the first time, we were thrilled. But Jack was 25 and married, and he needed a paying gig. We didn't have a full band, so he left. Then when Metal Massacre deal happened, Jack came back because he thought maybe this band is going somewhere. Then he left because it wasn't a paying gig. Then we did Deliver Us. He came back again thinking we had a chance. He was always weighing his options. If you were as good a singer as Jack, you could play in a cover band and make good money. He was married, so he needed the money. I like Jack a lot. He was a great guy, great singer, but he just wasn't into metal or anything. He was more of an AOR singer, and when Deliver Us first came out, some of my heavy metal friends from back home in San Jose thought that his voice wasn't heavy enough. I disregarded their opinion. If Jack wanted the gig, it was his forever. He just didn't want it, and he wasn't a real heavy metal guy. He would sing any kind of music. But boy, I would pitch him a melody line, and in one take, he would have it down and sound like he had been singing the song forever. Question. but at least Jack was in for the demo. Therefore, you managed to get a complete lineup to begin the recordings. Bill, almost. Like I said, Joe Hall was gone by the time Jack came in, and after so many auditions, no one finally replaced Joe. That's why I played bass on the demo, and we had no bass player at the time. Question: when and where was the demo recorded? Bill: well, we had a demo tape for a while before we found out about Slagle and Metal Massacre. I remember we recorded the demo in a punk rock studio, or at least the engineer and everyone in that place was totally punk rock. And that was 1981 because I remember I was 20 and Jack Rucker was 25 and married, as I had already pointed. Question: can you please mention the tracks included in this demo? Bill: the first song in the demo was Winds of Thor, but there was also The Rainbow, Black Mass, Child of the Damned, Soliloquy, and City Walls of Troy, which was recorded last because if you hear it, the bass drops out of the song. That's because we ran out of studio time and I didn't have time to finish the bass for that song. Note: in an interview I did with the band back in 2001, William answered a question about the demo 1981, mentioning that the exact track list, the songs on the tape, are Winds of Thor, Black Mass, Child of the Damned, Soliloquy, The Rainbow, and the City Walls of Troy. Continuing on, it's pretty wild stuff. I remembered that after we recorded those songs, Mark and I must have listened to the tape 1,000 times, asking ourselves the question, do we really sound that good? It was amazing, that is, having a demo tape back then. Question: well, so again, we give a correct full track list of the Warlord demo, ignoring all the incorrect information that is spread on the internet. So, as he said before, the Warlord 1981 demo is Winds of Thor, Black Mass, Child of the Damned, Soliloquy, The Rainbow, City Walls of Troy. Question: there are 2 songs only to be heard on this demo tape. The Rainbow is the first one. Bill: well, I thought it was good for very, very early Warlord, but I would never put it on an album. To me, it became dated very quickly. It needed development. The version you hear on the demo is in skeleton form, but I wouldn't consider it or be interested in working on this song again. I have much better riffs and I'm going to get involved in music again. This just kind of reflects the kind of guitar player I was when I was 19 or 20. You can hear all the influences of my development. I had melody in my compositions, but not in my lead guitar playing. Plus, these kinds of songs with long, boring, clean guitar picking parts, and then with heavy choruses, have been done by now a million times. It may have been good for way back then, but it was dated by 1985. City Walls of Troy is the second. Yeah, in the night I see a horse. Odysseus has won his final war. In the night I hear the lies. Odysseus has fooled them by surprise. Actually, I wrote a whole poem about this as if I was an outsider observing, seeing what was going down that night. I liked writing poetry, but I figured I might as well make them into lyrics, which is much harder than just plain poetry. Unless you're talking about Homer or Milton or someone like that. I always kind of liked that song, but we had already had our heavy songs prioritized and our commercial songs prioritized. Question: in the demo, we can hear the song Soliloquy with a version of Jack Rucker on vocals. The song is widely known by its official version on the And the Cannons of Destructions Have Begun album with Rick Cunningham doing vocals. Would you compare the 2 versions? Which one fits you the most? Bill: Jack Rucker sang the melody exactly the way I had written it, note for note, and it took him 1 take. If we could have afforded just a bit more studio time in this punk rock studio then, Jack would have added some nice harmonies. The Cannons version with Rick Cunningham doesn't approach Rucker's performance. In fact, I was never happy with the vocals on that song by Rick Cunningham, especially the chorus, where the engineer erroneously raised the background melody line too high in the mix so it becomes the dominant voice. If it was recorded correctly with Jack Rucker singing it according to my wishes and the harmony vocals were mixed in properly, it would have been a much better song. I have no idea why we didn't record Soliloquy with Jack Rucker and put it on the Deliver Us album. It was stupid. I think we thought with Penny for a Poor Man and Winter Tears, Soliloquy would take away from the heaviness of the album. It was one of those decisions that you regret. The Warlord lineup for 1981, the demo recording, it was William J. Thomas on guitar and bass, Mark Zonder on drums, Jack Rucker on vocals, and Jerry Alcabar on keyboards. Chapter: The Metal Massacre Days. One day, Mark and William took an advertisement from one of Brian Slagle, who was looking for metal bands to record for his Metal Massacre compilation album. The two went to Slagle's record store, or at least the store that he managed, Oz Records, and asked him to play some of the songs off their recent demo. After putting the Warlord demo on with Winds of Thor into his sound system at Oz Records, it must have been only seconds when Slagle asked if the two would record a song for his compilation album. The two accepted, and Lucifer's Hammer was released on the now classic Metal Massacre 2. However, the band's lineup was not completed because Warlord are still in search for a stable singer, so the track was not included in the first volume of the Metal Massacre compilation. Jack Rucker, who ended up singing on all the Metal Massacre compilation tracks, Lucifer Hammer on Metal Massacre 2 and Ms. Victoria on Metal Massacre 3, and later on the Deliver Us mini album, was coming and going, as Bill states. So the band was auditioning various singers, trying to find a stable one, Bill Thomas remembers. Question: the band never appeared on Metal Massacre 1, it was on volumes 2 and 3. Why? Bill: we didn't have a singer. We thought of recording Child of the Damned with me singing it, but decided against it, so we told Slagle that we would like to be on Metal Massacre 2, the first song on either side. At that point, Jack Rucker felt that we were going somewhere, so he sang on Lucifer's Hammer. Story goes like this: we had already done the demo by then and met Slagle. Slagle mentioned the possibility of us still getting onto Metal Massacre 1. Now we had Jack Rucker coming and going, etc. We didn't feel he was committed. We were trying to find a stable singer. We went into the studio, big 24-track studio, recorded Child of the Damned, and had a few different singers try it. The Warlord lineup for the 1983 Metal Massacre 2 and 3 compilations was, of course, Bill on guitar, now calling himself Destroyer, Mark Zonder on drums, now calling himself Thunderchild, Jack Rucker on vocals, now calling himself Damian King, and Diane Cornarens on keyboards, calling herself Sentinel. Chapter: Deliver Us. Deliver Us, released 29th of April 1983 on Metal Blade Records as MBR 1005. This is the first mini LP of Warlord, one of the most important chapters in metal history. It is not only the fact that William J. Thomas' talent gave birth to those beautiful, magnificent compositions that are included on this mini album. It is not only the fact that every song is blessed with his magical guitar playing. The most important fact in the case of this record, and in Warlord's music in general, is the actual chemistry that is generated between Bill and Mark Zonder. Indeed, without Zonder's phenomenal drumming, those songs would sound totally different. And it is actually this chemistry between those two musicians that keeps the spirit of Warlord alive until today. Inspired by a wide musical range from classical music to the 70s guitar-driven sound of Rainbow and UFO, Thomas presented to the world some of the most melodic, emotional, and intelligent metal compositions ever written. A careful listening of the Warlord material would bring forth even more influences on their sound. From the new wave of British heavy metal to a wider range of Euro metal aesthetic, everything is perfectly balanced under Warlord's semi-progressive musical style, a style that remains unique until today, a style which pioneered what is called today epic power metal. The album begins with the same titled song, Deliver Us from Evil, that simply generates and gives life to the term epic metal. A melodic acoustic guitar interlude, the drums of war, and then the call to battle. Quote, to the swords, to the guns. Hearing this composition, you would realize how cleverly are the lead guitar parts, not only on the specific parts of the song as main themes, but in almost every part in order to give shape to the complete composition. Warlord is probably the only band in the entire metal world that is not using the riffs as the only main element of their compositions. Guitarist William J. Thomas composes on a totally different way. compared to other metal guitarists and bands inspired by classical music standards, so the main guitar riffs would be completely accompanied by various guitar themes, lead parts, melodies, and sometimes, very often, such parts would be the main elements of the song. Before I move forward to the other songs on the debut album, I would like to point out 2 facts. Firstly, the magnificent singer Jack Damian King I Rucker sings on this mini album. Secondly, the music is blessed by the performing of Diane the Sentinel Cornarins, a keyboard player that gave her own magical touch to the final compositions. The very special thing about Jack Rucker is the color of his voice. It would be easy for someone to recognize Jack's voice among the thousands and thousands of singers. Another interesting fact is that Rucker's musical roots were mainly into hard rock stuff. His big participation in cover bands and his pre-Warlord recorded material, Alcana, Welcome to My Paradise LP, which is a fantastic 70s hard prog rock record, made him build a very melodic, solid, and mainstream vocal approach. William Thomas, who had composed all of the Warlord vocal melodies on each and every Warlord song, used Rucker's vocal approach correctly on each and every composition. So the final result was those magnificent vocals you can hear on Deliver Us mini album. Epic and powerful vocal melodies sung in a crystal clear and solid way, balancing between heaviness and melody and power. Rucker's vocal style brings forth all of his influences from the melodic mid-late 70s punk, prog, pre-OAOR, hard rock stuff like Foreigner's debut album, early Journey like their debut album, and Styx, combined with the steel of Rainbow, the first era with Ronnie James Dio, and expanded on Warlord's thundering metal, which was unique. Winter Tears is a magnificent melodic metal ballad, a radio-friendly mid-tempo song. However, the composition sounds richer and much more interesting compared to the thousands of ballads that were released back on that era, thanks to the magnificent lead guitar parts, to the brilliant guitar vocal interlude, and to the acoustic epilogue, and moreover thanks to the main guitar theme of the song, which is just excellent. The metal thunder that will follow is called Child of the Damned, and if you are searching for a good example of the term power metal, you surely have it. William J. Thomas probably had in mind the thunderous, fast songs of Rainbow or Judas Priest while setting the speed up in this composition. However, his own unique riffing is a big trademark of this composition, and the vocals of Rucker, who does his first high-pitched scream in here. I also have to add here how magnificent this tune's acoustic interlude sounds. Penny for a Poor Man that follows is for sure the most enigmatic song Warlord has ever composed. It starts based on a semi-prog metal riff followed by a melodic part which is the basis of the composition. The song will soon be driven to an emphatic musical bridge that will open a straight gate to the chorus. Many more bridges and lead parts are used to emphasize and give life and expression to every single melody of this song. And don't forget to spend some time reading the lyrics of this one. They carry a special message. The next song is called Black Mask, and it is sure one of the darkest compositions Warlord have released so far. During the intro of the song, one was able to hear for the first time the voice of Bill Chrysler. This voice would become the ultimate trademark on all narrative parts that Warlord would release on their saga's first era. This absolutely heavy, almost in a doom metal mood mid-tempo anthem is describing a black magic ritual. Thomas would later point out that he was heavily inspired by the film The Omen when he was writing the lyrics of the song. The passion of Rucker's vocals fills the song with extra power, and the emphatic drumming of Zonder would turn even this mid-tempo tune into real thunder. Just after the song finishes, the listener is blown away by the opening riff of Lucifer's Hammer. The tempos are fast again, the riffs are made of absolute steel, and yes, this is another conquering tune by Warlord, blessed by those magical guitar melodies. I have already referred to the chemistry between Thomas and Zonder, but you have to listen to this particular song if you want to realize what I actually mean. There is a perfect guitars, drums, dialogue laid out around this tune that has become a Warlord classic. The song Miss Victoria was originally included on Metal Massacre 3 compilation, was added as a bonus track to the Japan pressing of Deliver Us mini album. This is a bizarre composition, dark interludes, haunting main guitar riffs expressed in a prog mood, lead guitar melodies that are filling the song with agony, out of this planet drumming, and the vocals of Rucker who lives inside the song. And I almost forgot, the maniacal laughing of Bill Chrysler will offer you a great shock when you hear it for the first time. Chapter, Deliver Us, recording an opus. The group actually gathered some $500 to $800 and they proceeded to record their first album. As some of the bonus tracks included in this reissue are from the album's recording sessions, below you can read some interesting details about the album's recording process. $500 to $800 to record an album like Deliver Us. No one would believe it, so at first could you provide some details about the Deliver Us sessions? Bill, the Deliver Us album was recorded in the 8-track studios, Sound and Vision Studios in North Hollywood, California for $500 to $800, money that we scratched and saved. Question. Let's go in the studio and meet Warlord on their recordings. Bill, there was a cricket in the room that kept making noise and we had to play around it so it wouldn't show up on the audio. A comedy of horrors. I was playing a Strat modified by Wayne Charvel personally through a Marshall. We layered everything. First, Mark recorded his drum work to a click track, 2 tracks, and then I recorded the bass over the drums on 1 track. Then I recorded down the rhythm guitars on 2 tracks. On each track, I played the exact same guitar rhythm part, and we panned them wide so it would sound like one giant guitar. Then there was 1 track for the keyboards and 2 tracks for the vocals. He doubled his voice by singing the exact same melody line on both tracks, sometimes using a harmony in 1 track. And Mark and I came up with this idea to make Jack's voice sound better. The leads were played on 2 tracks for the vocalist, and we plugged in a narrative, sound effects, or hysterical laughing like in Miss Victoria, anywhere we could find an open space. The engineer accidentally erased 1 guitar track on the beginning riff of Lucifer's Hammer, and I had to bring my guitar and amp back into the studio, and he tried to EQ it to the same sound. Thus, if you listen to the beginning of Lucifer's Hammer, you will hear 1 guitar sound in the opening riff, and then the song kicks in with a different guitar sound. Question, how was it to work with Cornell Tennessee, the engineer on Deliver Us? Bill, he actually had some good ideas like slowing the tape down a bit so Jack could sing the opening to Winter Tears because it was just too high. Jack could do it with practice, kind of a Steve Perry sound, but we didn't have the time to practice. And question, what happened? Bill, well, I told Jack to sing at that falsetto, that high voice. However, it was just too high. He could almost reach it, and with practice he could have easily done it, but it was just a bit too high for him. So what are we to do? Well, damn, my vision for the song is not happening. The engineer understood what I wanted. He slowed the song down just slightly, as if the guitars, bass, and keys were down tuned to an E flat. He didn't slow it down that much, just slightly, so that Jack could sing, and it turned out wonderful. The only thing we were afraid of is that people might think it was a girl singing, which of course was not acceptable at heavy metal at the time. Question, well, the engineer knew what to do. Bill, yeah, but he was paying attention to our ideas as well. For example, doubling the vocals was our idea. I wanted to double the guitars so they would sound thick. We didn't just copy and paste 1 track to another track, but I duplicated the rhythm guitars on 2 tracks, and we had Jack duplicate his voice on 2 tracks because he wanted his voice to sound thicker. In fact, we did this with the vocalist on all our albums. Plus, we would pan wide the guitars in the 2 vocal tracks, the guitars all the way wide and the vocals almost all the way wide. Maybe there was a bit too much reverb, but we were new to the studio experience. The studio was in Van Nuys and Corky. Cornell Tennessee, the engineer, was a professional, has-been musician, but he worked very hard. He was a very cool guy. I think he was high most of the time, but he kept getting up and walking into the back room. It was the early 80s in Los Angeles, so everybody was doing drugs. Anyway, he had a lot of mics and equipment from over the years, and although we didn't use any of his equipment, please note that when I say we made the decisions here, I mean Mark and myself. The other members of Warlord never really had any say. Question, who did the production of the album? Bill, the entire album was produced by Cornell Tennessee, myself, and Mark. The Warlord lineup for the Deliver Us mini album was William Thomas on guitars and bass, known as the Destroyer, Mark Zonder on drums, known as the Thunderchild, Jack Rucker on vocals, known as Damian King, and Diane Cornarens on keyboards, known as Sentinel. Chapter: The Deliver Us warm-up recordings. Being in the studio and before proceeding to the final recording sessions of the Deliver Us material, the band would record some warm-up takes of the songs. Bill, who would refer on to this material as pre-Deliver Us warm-up, has some interesting comments on those recordings that are included in this reissue as bonus tracks. Quote, "Those recordings were done in the same studio as Deliver Us, but we just wanted to hammer out the songs in a demo form before we took it to the album. They're just a bit wild, the way they would play each song as if we were rehearsing it, with me improvising all over the place. Like with Winter Tears, you can really hear Jack struggling to hit the high notes. The first part of the song was slowed down slightly so his voice would sound smooth, but on the second verse, the speed was normal and we had to reach those high notes. Here you can hear his voice crackle. I remember he had to rehearse it several times to be able to sing it. With Penny for a Poor Man, it sounds similar to the final version, but there are some differences. There are chimes and a gong in this version. In Lucifer's Hammer, the guitars are the same at the beginning because Corky erased one of the guitars on the final version. Plus, there is an extra harmony in here that I didn't like. Plus, Jack sings Devastation wrong. I remember making some changes here on the vocals, slightly. And Soliloquy, this demonstrates what we were planning on putting Soliloquy on the Deliver Us album, but decided against it because we already had Winter Tears and Penny for a Poor Man, and we didn't want the album to sound too light. Jack sang the song better than Rick Cunningham, and the chorus was mixed properly, unlike the Cannons album. And of course, Black Mask, another take from the same pre-Deliver Us warm-up sessions. This is the end of the interview as related to the Deliver Us mini LP. And we will continue on later with And the Cannons of Destructions Have Begun. That will be the next one that I will approach. I hope you dig this, and thanks for joining me, and long live Warlord. Take care.